How to Breathe by Ashley Neese. Read by Book Dragon, Part 2. Breath and Anxiety. If bringing awareness to the breath creates anxiety, it's often connected to a dysregulated nervous system. This dysregulation has a major impact on the breath. When I work with clients who have this experience, we begin by exploring their nervous system and creating the container for it to come into a more regulated state. To do this, I start with the outer edges of the body, such as bringing awareness to the feet and slowly work inward to allow an easier way for clients to ground themselves. As regulation takes shape, their breath tends to naturally and without effort become less anxious. In this more relaxed state, it is then safe to move into targeted breathwork practices. Breath and trauma. The experience of being overwhelmed by thoughts and emotions is often a marker of trauma. Trauma is anything we experience as a threat to our survival or overall well-being. These threats register in our nervous system, and if the natural restoration process is interrupted, coping mechanisms are put in place to survive the experiences. If left unprocessed, these coping mechanisms may lead to belief and behavioral challenge that change and create patterns that are difficult to heal without addressing the body, the nervous system, and the breath. Breath work is an incredibly powerful tool because, with proper pacing and guidance, it can be an entry point into the nervous system. This has the potential, along with body-focused counseling, to help restore the nervous system's natural rhythm. When this system is reestablished, the client is no longer in a trauma response cycle, and the root of the trauma can be healed. When I start teaching breath work, I often taught very activating practices in big groups. As the size of my classes increased, I began noticing that there were always a handful of students who got flooded with memories and stored emotions. They couldn't cope with the practice because their nervous system did not have the capacity to handle their experiences. I started working with those students privately and learned that the activating breathwork practices opened them up too fast, which is why their systems went into overload. These clients needed a different approach to working with their breath. Knowing that the breath can be a key component in trauma healing, I set out to deepen my personal practice and studies. I researched cutting-edge psychology, somatic therapies, and neuroscience, which shifted my approach to the breath as it relates to developmental and relational trauma. While working with the clients privately and in groups, I developed my own set of practices and methodology that continues to support my clients, allowing them to shift the root of their trauma and integrate their past with their present. These practices are outside the scope of this book and are taught in my individual sessions and classes. How to create a practice. It is easy to get overwhelmed with how to start a practice when you're busy, have a family, or are new to self-care and establishing time for yourself. In this section, I guide you through my go-to best methods for establishing a breathwork practice and staying consistent. Intention is everything. Intentions give you a purpose and direction and serve as a touchstone when developing a personal breathwork practice. If we don't tap into our motivation to connect our breath on a regular basis, it is easy to get lost and forget why we started a breathwork practice in the first place. Intentions are different than goals, as they are less focused on the outcome and more about the driving force that is supporting your journey. An intention is like a North Star, a guiding energy that will bring you back home to yourself again and again. Without this aim and reference guide, our practice sessions can feel uncontained and unstable. Setting an intention at the beginning of your breathwork practice sets the tone for it and keeps you connected to why you are practicing. This becomes key when things get tough in your life or in your practice, as they inevitably will from time to time. It is also important because many of my clients have reported that when their lives get really great and full, their practice starts to wane. No matter the length of my personal breathwork sessions, I always make sure to set up an intention. I have a very simple intention setting practice of placing one hand of my heart, taking a few breaths in and out through my nose, and trusting the first intuitive hit I receive about my intention for that practice session. When setting your intention, it is important to keep it affirmative, clear, and focused on your internal well-being or personal and spiritual growth. There are many intention practices out there for manifesting tangible things like houses, careers, and relationships. But for the purpose of setting your intention before breathwork, it's most potent to focus on your personal internal desires. Here are a few examples. I intend to stay with my body. I intend to receive myself fully. I intend to stay with the practice. I intend to soften. I intend to follow my breath. I intend to open my heart. I intend to hold a strong container for myself. I intend to feel what is calling to be felt. I intend to heal myself. Once you have identified your intention, say it silently to yourself or aloud before you begin your practice session. You can use your intention throughout your practice as a foundational guide to help you stay connected to your practice. At the end of your session, it can be helpful to journal about your intention in your notes as a way to further integrate the intention. Prioritizing yourself. If there is one consistent issue that many of my clients bring to their first sessions with me, aside from the anxiety and stress, it is not knowing how to prioritize themselves. This has been a huge theme in so many lives, myself included, and starting a breathwork practice can be a wonderful, tangible way to take one step towards putting yourself first. By the time this book makes it into your hands, I'll be a mother, which I already know will change my entire life. Not only will it help me grow and expand to new lengths, it will also challenge the work I've been doing on myself for the last 16 years around my own self-care and learning to put myself before others. Thankfully, I've been supporting parents in my practice for many years and have learned from their bravery, honesty, and vulnerability. Some of what it takes to show up for your family without losing yourself. Regardless of whether we want to have children or not, There is always some project or person that needs our attention. Many of us have been socialized to take care of others' needs before our own. As a result, we have kept ourselves small, not spoken up about our feelings or needs, and learned to shift ourselves to make others feel okay. What's amazing about taking this step forward, developing your own breathwork practice, is that not only to get all the benefit of the practice itself, but also engage in a revolutionary act that affirms that your needs matter. The most effective postures and where that they work best. There are 3 postures that I recommend for breath work: sitting up, standing, and laying down. In the breathwork practices section of this book, I discuss which posture is ideal for each practice. Sitting up. Sitting up is the most common posture for meditation, and it is great for breathwork as well. While seated practices are usually taught seated on the floor with legs crossed, I have found that sitting on a chair with feet firmly planted into the floor is the most ideal posture for seated breathwork. This is especially true if you have tight hips, have difficulty sitting on the floor, or tend to feel ungrounded in your life. If you fall into one or more of these 3 categories, begin by sitting in a chair. If you're an experienced meditator or yogi and prefer to sit directly on the floor or on a meditation bench or yoga block, please feel free. In a chair. Sit in a chair that has a firm seat and back. If you require extra support, place a pillow below your low back so that your spine can be tall. Notice if your head is leaning forward, and if so, draw it back to a line just over your shoulders. This takes extra weight off your spine and makes it easier to sit up tall. Place your feet on the floor, hip distance apart. Let your arms rest on your thighs, palms of the hands down if you're cold, and up if you're warm. Alternatively, you can place one hand on top of the other in your lap, palms facing up. On the floor. Sit directly on the floor or on a meditation cushion with legs crossed. Notice if your head is leaning forward, and if so, draw it back to align with your shoulders. Rest your hands on your knees, palm face down if you're cold and up if you're warm. Alternatively, you can rest one hand on top of the other on your lap, palms facing up. Another option for the floor is to sit on a meditation bench or yoga block. Kneel on the ground and place the bench or block just under your bottom. Sit up tall and lengthen your spine. Notice if your head is leaning forward, and if so, draw it back to a line just over your shoulders. Rest your hands on your knees, palm facing up if you're warm, and down if you're cold. Alternatively, you can rest one hand on top of the other on your lap, palms facing up. Standing up. The standing posture is the least taught in breath work, but one that I find essential for certain practices, especially those around grounding or moving intense energy. This posture is very simple and is best done with shoes and socks off so that you can feel the connection to the floor or earth. Stand up tall with your feet hip width apart. Notice if your head is leaning forward, and if so, align it back over your shoulders. Let your arms rest by your sides, slightly turned out with your palms facing forward. Lying down. Lying on your back is an ideal posture for restorative breathwork practices, as well as practices where you are moving sadness or grief, tapping into intuition or addressing sleep. There are two ways to practice lying down, with or without neck and low back support. To practice without support, simply lie down on the floor, preferably on a mat or blanket so that you are comfortable. Rest your arms down by your sides or have one hand on your belly and one on your heart. To practice with support, lie down and place a soft pillow or rolled up blanket under your knees to support the low back and have something similar under your neck. Rest your arms down by your sides or have one hand on your belly and one on your heart. The ritual of home practice. A yoga teacher told me that 30 minutes of home practice was the equivalent of a 90-minute class. That stuck with me because it made so much sense. Cultivating a home practice is one of the best things you can do for your self-care and development. It's not easy, but believe me, it's worth it. The first aspect of home practice is setting up your space. For some of my clients, this means a room or corner of a room that is their dedicated practice space. Others practice in their bedroom. They do it seated at the edge of their bed, laying down in a bed, or in a chair in the room. The purpose of a dedicated practice space is that over time, that particular place comes to hold a certain energy that your body immediately connects to when you begin your practice. It is also a nod to creating a ritual around your practice, which is a key component that infuses your practice with meaning and a loose structure of support. Take a tour of your home with the intention of choosing a place to practice each day. If you're not sure where to begin, just pick a place and practice in it for a week. Don't stress about this part. The important thing is to choose and begin. You can always switch later. When you decide where you are going to practice, put an offering in that area that feels supportive to your practice. It can be a piece of artwork, a crystal, a feather, a flower, or a photograph of someone you admire. Think of this as the beginning of your altar or a place that holds your offerings. If you have time and interest, you can add several offerings to your altar. If only one offering feels right, that's great too. The point of the offering is to choose something that helps you drop into your practice and supports your overall intentions. Lastly, if there are things you need for your practice, like blanket, cushion, and journal, be sure those items are in your practice area. I find that having those items in a specific place along with your offerings sets up a wonderful invitation to practice. The idea is to make the space, whether it's an entire room or the corner of a shared area, a place where you want to practice. I have a few singing bowls set up in my space that are always encouraging me to play with them. This makes it much easier for me to practice some days. Letting go of how it is supposed to look. While it's important to set an intention and have a dedicated practice space, we have to be willing to let it all go in an instant. The dog is barking at the door, and there's an unexpected delivery we have to tend to. A child comes in to talk to us. We're on vacation and would rather practice on the beach. by all means, do. We are too tired to go to the other room and decide to do our breathwork practice in bed, laying down in the morning. We go to our dedicated practice space and realize we are just too hungry and we need to make a snack instead. No matter what's happening in our lives around our home practice, it is important to have a judgment free practice. This can be challenging, especially with how inundated we are with imagery of people being healthy and spiritual all over social media and the internet. It can feel like we're doing it wrong sometimes because our practice looks messy and inconsistent, or more often than we care to admit. You're okay, and your practice is too. The most generous gift we can give to ourselves is to drop the judgment and shame around our practice and simply do what we can each day. As someone who suffered from brutal self judgment and shame for most of my life, I can tell you that softening up and allowing myself to color outside of the lines, so to speak, in my breathwork practice and other areas of my life has opened me up to such immense freedom and lightness in my heart. The myth of needing to practice in silence. It can be annoying to hear a lot of noise when you're trying to find your Zen, but it's part of life and we need to adjust to it. I remember ages ago being on a silent meditation retreat and on day 3 wanting to crawl out of my skin because I felt like the man next to me was breathing too loud. I literally felt like I was going insane, and I was convinced he was ruining my retreat experience. When I think about it now, I laugh, but at the time, it was incredibly aggravating. One tip I learned early on was that any outside sound that bothers you is simply an invitation to anchor yourself back into your breath and in your body. The beauty of a breathwork practice is that you have an actual noise machine with you, your breath, that you can change the volume on if needed to support your mind to settle during your practice. If you are sensitive to outside sounds, I suggest breathing a little bit louder to help you ground into your practice and stay in your body. Portable practice. One of my favorite aspects of breathwork is that it is portable. You don't need a special outfit or props to practice. You have everything you need to begin with you at all times. Early on in my private practice, clients asked me for tips on what they could do breathwork-wise to support them outside of our sessions and their personal practices. Below are 3 of my go-to mini practices to support these real-life moments when you need to stay grounded. If you tend to get stressed at work, feel anxious preparing for a difficult conversation, or feel out of your body before getting in front of a large crowd, try the 5-breath grounding practice. Set a quick intention, place your feet on the ground, hip distance apart, and take 5 breaths in through your nose and long exhales out of your mouth. Notice how you feel afterward. When you feel emotionally or mentally overloaded and need a quick timeout, try the 5-breath reset practice. Set a quick intention, inhale through your nose as long as you can without discomfort, then exhale as long as possible through your mouth. Repeat 5 times and notice the difference. If your mind is racing and you can't get it to focus on the present moment, try the 5-breath alignment practice. Set a quick intention, take a deep Inhale through your nose while counting from 1 to 5. Exhale through your nose, counting from 5 to 1. Repeat this 5 times and become aware of where your mind lands. Nature is a huge helper. When possible, practice your breath work in nature. This is an incredible way to connect to the elements and the earth, which further regulates your nervous system and deepens your breathwork practice experience. Some of the most profound breathwork sessions I've had personally have been outside, either in the woods or near the beach. Syncing up with the rhythms and cycles of nature through our breath is incredibly replenishing and restorative to our well-being on all levels. Two of my favorite ways to practice in nature are with my back against a tree, which immediately anchors my body, or lying on the natural ground, the grass, or a sandy beach. Tracking your practice, journaling. Journaling is an ideal way to track your practice. Keep notes on what you're discovering and be able to see how far you've come over time. Creating a dedicated breathwork journal and writing down a few sentences about each practice session deepens your personal work and creates richer practice experiences. There are many ways to record information these days, and while I am a fan of using Notes app and voice notes, the act of writing helps the brain and the body sync up, which helps you to integrate what you're learning into your session. Keep it simple with your journal. After your breathwork sessions at home, write down a few sentences or notes about your experience. What came up, something new that you learned or felt, a creative idea that popped up, an intuitive hit that you received, a pattern that you recognize, or a new layer of work that you want to explore. Sometimes, in session, so much comes up that it can be tempting to stop the session and write things down. Over the years, I've learned that it's better to keep the flow of the session going and to trust that if you're meant to remember it, you will at the end. If your journal is portable, it can be great to take with you when you leave the house so that you can keep track of what's happening with your breath throughout the day. Some of the practices in this book are meant to be done on the spot, and if your journal is handy, you can keep track of what's working well for you. Consistency is everything. Just like my saying, the way we breathe is how we live. The way we practice is also how we live. No matter what teacher or expert I speak to in any field, what I hear repeatedly is that if you wish to build a practice, you have to be consistent. 20-minute meditation is very popular in the wellness world for many reasons, including accessing different brainwave states. While this time frame works for some people in some schools of meditation, it doesn't really apply to breath work because our practice by nature is more active and somatically focused. When I learned to meditate, I started with 5 minutes. When I learned to practice breath work, I started with 7 minutes. For the practices in this book, I specifically suggest lengths of time as a starting point to the particular practice. Some are designed to be quick and others are designed to go longer. If you are new to breath work, please use the times as a guide and adjust them as needed. The main point I want to stress about consistency is that it's not about the length of time that you practice. Rather, it's about practicing as often as possible. Anytime you want to learn something new, you practice. Our nervous systems are built on repetition. This is how we learn. I've heard so many people say, "Oh, I tried breath work and nothing changed." Or, "I tried meditation and it just didn't work." When I inquire a little bit more, they usually say they tried for a day or two and when they didn't receive the desired or promised benefit. Imagine if you wanted to learn to play the piano and you've never played an instrument before and you didn't know how to read music. Picture yourself at your first lesson. Would you leave thinking, "Oh, piano isn't for me, I can't play"? Or perhaps you would recognize that it's going to take time and dedication to be able to read music and make beautiful sounds.